All right, we're going to look at a factoring by grouping from last week. We didn't have a chance to go over one of the types, so I wanted to make sure that we did. This one is a little bit different because, as you can see, the term has a minus sign in front instead of a plus sign. When we are grouping these, we have to make sure that there is a plus between the two parentheses. So what that means is that that negative has to go inside that parentheses with that 3. That changes our GCF just a little bit. So when I'm doing the x squared plus 4x, the GCF of the numbers 1 and 4 is going to be 1. I have 2 x's and 1 x. Therefore, I have 1 x in the GCF. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide each term by 1x. Remember that we have to put the GCF in front of the parentheses. The 1's cancel out, or 1 divided by 1 is 1, either way. I have 2 x's on top, 1 x on the bottom, so that's going to leave 1 x. Plus 4 divided by 1 is 4, and the x's are going to cancel out. All right, now when I look at the GCF of the second parentheses, if I type into the calculator the GCF of -3 and -12, it's going to give me 3. But when this first term is negative, your GCF must be negative. And this is the only time that you're going to have a negative GCF. So I'm going to put the GCF in front of the parentheses times -3 divided by -3 is 1, and it leaves the x. -12 divided by -3 is +4. I know that in order to factor, these two parentheses must be the same, and they are. Therefore, I'm going to write my answer, and my answer is going to be 1x plus 4, which is your common parentheses, times what is outside 1x minus 3. And the answer would have been answer C. Make sure that you do check on Desmos. All right, the lesson today is going to be dealing with a quadratic equation, and we are going to learn how to identify the terms, and we're going to learn how to find the solutions. So a quadratic equation is an equation that can be written in the form of y = ax squared plus bx plus c, or f of x is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember from first semester that we know that y is the same thing as f of x. So in a quadratic equation, in this particular example, ax squared is the quadratic term, and that means it is the term that has x squared. Bx is the linear term, and that is the term that contains x to the first power. And c is the constant term, that is the term that has no variable. The highest exponent is 2, therefore the degree of this quadratic equation is 2. Right, we're going to identify the terms of this quadratic equation. Remember that we said the quadratic term was the term that had x to the second power. Therefore, my quadratic term is going to be 5x squared. The linear term is the term that contains x to the first power. Make sure that when you're writing these terms, if it has a minus in front, that means the term is going to be -7x. And the constant term is the term that does not contain a variable, and that would be the term 1. Right, in this example, the quadratic term again is the term that contains x squared, and that's going to be 4x squared. The linear term, I do not have a term that contains x to the first power, I would say that the linear term would be 0x, or I could just say there is none. And the constant term is the term that contains no variable, therefore it would be -3. All right, next example, the quadratic term is going to be the term that contains x squared, and it's going to be 5x squared. The linear term is the term that contains x to the first power, and that is -2x. And the constant term is going to be the term that contains no variable, and that would be 3. All right, when we are talking about a quadratic equation, when we graph it, and we are going to be just typing these into Desmos to graph, is going to have a U-shaped graph. And this U-shaped graph is called a parabola. All right, so when we were graphing a linear equation, like y is equal to 3x, our graph was a straight line. But in a quadratic equation, if it contains an x squared term, then your graph is going to be a U-shaped graph, which is called a parabola. All right, to determine the solution to a quadratic equation, we are going to do this graphing it. And there are going to be 3 possible situations that you may have. The number of real solutions is at most 2, and real solutions means that our answer is going to be a number. Remember that real numbers contains all numbers. You can have no solutions, and the first graph is an example of no solutions, and that is because that graph does not cross the x-axis. So when the graph is completely above or completely below the x-axis, there are going to be no solutions. Your graph could be a graph that crosses the x-axis at only one point, and that would mean there would be one solution. Or the majority of your quadratic equations are going to cross the x-axis at 2 points, and that indicates that it has 2 solutions. So very simple to determine how many and what they are. We're just typing it into Desmos, and we're looking at the graph to determine how many and what the actual solutions are. All right, when we're talking about solving these equations, we're talking about finding the value of x when y is 0. This is actually your definition of an x-intercept. So the solutions to a quadratic equations are the x-intercepts. They can also be called zeros or roots. All right, and this statement is very, very important. These words can be mixed in different orders. Solutions are roots, or zeros are the x-intercepts of the graph. You may be given a problem and it asks you to find the solution. That means you're going to type it into Desmos and you're going to see where it crosses the x-axis. It may say find the root. You're going to type it into Desmos and see where it crosses the x-axis. It may ask you to find the zeros. You're going to type it into Desmos and see where it crosses the x-axis. And finally, it could ask what the x-intercepts are, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to type into Desmos and see where it crosses the x-axis. So solutions or roots or zeros are the x-intercepts of the graph. Very, very important statement to remember. All right, on this example, we are going to find the solutions to this particular quadratic equation. Notice that it is written in the form of f of x, which is function notation, is equal to x squared minus 4. When you type this into Desmos, you can either type it in as f of x, or you can type it in as y. So I'm just going to type it in the way it shows, which is going to be f of x is equal to x squared minus 4. We see that we do have a U-shaped graph, a parabola. We know that the solutions to a U-shaped graph, to a quadratic equation, is where the graph crosses the x-axis. So the graph crosses at this point, which is -2, 0, and at this point, which is 2, 0. Therefore, my solutions to this problem are going to be x is equal to 2, x is equal to -2. They see this written where it's the same number and just different signs as x is equal to positive -2. So if this problem said find the solutions are positive -2, the roots are positive -2, the zeros are x equal positive -2, and the x-intercepts are x equal positive -2. All right, we are finding the solution to this quadratic equation. Y is equal to x squared minus 6x plus 9. I went ahead and typed this into Desmos. You can see that you do have a U-shaped graph, but this graph only touches the x-axis at one point. Therefore, there is only one solution, one root, one zero, one x-intercept, and that is x is equal to 3. All right, on the last example, we are given an equation, quadratic equation, y is equal to 2x squared minus 5x plus 10. I type this into Desmos, and I see that I do have a U-shaped graph. I ask, where does this graph cross the x-axis? It does not cross the x-axis. Therefore, this quadratic equation has no real solutions. No solutions. Main thing that we have to remember is that if you are asked to find a solution, a root, a zero, or an x-intercept, you are typing into Desmos and determining where the graph crosses the x-axis.